I had went in, I'd won a huge jackpot. When the cashier paid me out, he said, "Now you're gonna go home with it." Like, I was incredulous he was even asking me. I'm like, of course, like, who do you think I am? 8 hours later, as he's leaving his shift, he just looks at me. I'm still at the same machine. And I had played almost all of it back. And he just shook his head that I got in a fight with my now ex. And I just went to the casino, and it triggered a week-long binge for me. And I won the most money I'd ever won, and I lost all of it. And I was at my lowest of lows. I wanted to end my life. I didn't know that I was using it for coping. I just knew that I wanted to gamble. I didn't know that it was even an addiction. I was struggling. I didn't know anything about addiction, really. And
Sorry,
they put me
Christina,
on this.
just let me stop you there 1 second. My two daughters have just walked into the room. I'm so sorry.
Because recovery isn't just about recovering from the disorder, the disease, the addiction, however you identify. It really is about...
Hello, everyone. Today I have a very special guest here with me. She is the founder of the Broke Girl Society. She is the co-host of the Bet Free Life podcast with Brian and Christina. She does so much amazing work in the recovery space, and it is honestly a privilege to have her here with me today. Christina Cook, welcome to Addicted Recovery.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me on.
No, I just feel blessed that you've agreed to come on. You do so much amazing work that I want to talk about here today. However, can we start with your story first? Can you tell me about your gambling, where your gambling first started off?
Yeah, so I started gambling when I was about 28. Prior to that, where I live in Oklahoma, there wasn't any gambling really prior to like the early 2000s. There was like a small couple of racetracks, nothing major, right? A couple bingo holes. And then in the early 2000s, the laws changed. And so gambling became this big thing for Oklahoma. There's casinos everywhere. And so I really didn't have much experience with gambling prior to around 27, 28. I'd been to Vegas a couple of times prior to that. Didn't even gamble when I was in Vegas. I got a tattoo. Like it was never something that was on my radar. And then when I found myself at 28 and I was going through a divorce, I'd been through a lot of things with my first husband. And I just don't think I was finding ways to deal with a lot of stuff that I had gone through, infertility being one of them. One of the things I had gone through really early on in that marriage. And so like it ended up divorced for several reasons, not just that. But so I'm 28. All my friends are getting married or having babies. And here I've struggled with infertility. Now I'm divorced, I'm single. And I just wasn't really connecting with anybody. Like my friends were getting together and they were talking about nurseries and wedding plans, and it was just so far from where I was in my life, and it was just really hard to be around those kind of conversations. And so I was trying to figure out what I could do with myself on the weekends. I wasn't somebody for the bars. And I remember they had opened up a casino just up from my house a little ways, and it just seemed like somewhere I could go and maybe just have a drink and have a little entertainment and go home, right? I mean, that's the purpose. It's for entertainment. And so I found myself kind of going up there occasionally, and then maybe a little bit more regularly. And by regularly, I mean maybe every other weekend. At first, it might have been once a month. Then it maybe went to every other week. And I don't know why I keep saying week, but weekend. And it really was just a couple hours. And so for a few years, that's just kind of the pattern. It just go in, spend a little bit of money. I remember going in and spending $5 and being like, oh, that was such a waste of money, to the point where I started spending maybe $20 and betting 60 cents and still feeling like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm betting so much money. To fast forward the end when I'm spending $50 a bet and not even thinking about it. So it was just something that really was just to get me out of the house for a little while. And I think for a few years, that's just what it was. And then I found myself in a relationship that, at first was fine, good. everything was going great. And then as I was more into this relationship, abusive patterns started to happen. And I didn't really recognize them as abusive at the time because it wasn't physical. So it wasn't kind of a pain. It wasn't like a physical kind of pain. It was a very verbal, build me up, break me down. Couldn't do anything right. Never skinny enough. Never looked good enough. I was in this relationship that was abusive and harmful, and I was just so stuck in it. It controlled a lot of things in my life, and I found myself going to the casino a little bit more to it was a place where it wasn't asking anything of me just to feed it some money, and it wasn't saying all the negative things to me that I was experiencing outside of the casino. And so I just got comfortable there. It became this coping mechanism for me. And so anytime something was going wrong in my life, I found myself at the casino, spending more and more time there. I was developing friendships there. So it just became this comfortable place for me. And as that relationship really just got more intense and more abusive, I just found myself leaning into the gambling more. I remember the first jackpot I received was my mom had been experiencing some health issues, and we were living together at the time, and she just kept saying was having heartburn. And I was just like, well, maybe we need to go to the ER. And she's like, no, I got a doctor's appointment tomorrow. Let's just wait. I just ate a box of hot tamales. I don't know if you know what those are, but they're little hot candies here in the US. And so I said, you know what? I think I'm going to go with you just to make sure. Because my mom was notorious for like downplaying everything. So I went with her to the doctor, and they kind of thought maybe it was her gallbladder. But at the last minute, the doctor kind of turned, and she's like, you know what? Let's just do an EKG and just make sure. And so they ran the test on her heart, and they were like, oh my gosh, you are mid-heart attack. We got to get you to the hospital. And so it was just like, from that moment on, it was like chaos, right? So they're rushing my mom to the hospital, and all I can say is, I'm so mad at you. I'm so mad at you. I'm so mad at you. And, they're throwing papers at me, having me sign things. They're saying, hey, we need to get her back to surgery. We need to do all this. And it was just chaotic. And she ended up coming out of the thing okay. Like, she had blockages in two of her heart vessels, and they did everything they do. And when my sisters got there, I was like, I got to go home. I got to go home, get mom's bag. Like, I got to rest. I haven't slept, all this stuff. And the first place I went was the casino, right? Because I was so overwhelmed with everything I just went through. And I was just sitting at this machine, and I was just numbing out. And all of a sudden I won my first jackpot. And it was just like a progressive jackpot, and it just dropped. And wow, that was the pick me up that I needed. But I think that kind of cemented my behavior with gambling. It was like, oh, this is a good thing. It did make me feel better. And from then on, it just continued to get progressively worse over time. I just remember taking that jackpot and going back to the hospital with my mom and being like, look, I won money. I can pay down the deductibles in your hospital bill. And that's what I did. I did do that. But what I didn't really say in that story is that while I was at the casino for several hours, my sister was blowing up my phone like, where's mom's stuff? Mom needs her stuff. Like, she wants to take a shower. Like, where's her stuff? And I was missing all of those texts and calls. And that was kind of how it started rolling downhill for me.
I'm going to start with what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So I'm not going to ask you about that tattoo, but I am going to ask you about the gambling. So that jackpot actually happened simultaneously while your mum is in the hospital at the same time.
Yeah. It was just, and I think it really just kind of, again, cemented that behavior as gambling as a coping mechanism was a good thing. And I think that that's when my relationship with gambling really changed. Like, I had started to go a little bit more because of just escaping life, right? I was escaping the divorce and the feelings of that. I was escaping my loneliness and my disconnect from my friends. So I was already building those patterns pretty early. And then, the biggest thing happened to my mom, who I love very, very much. And, it really, those early patterns of like avoidance started to kind of help me build that relationship with my gambling. And I think this is, at that point, was like that pivotal point when after my mom had her heart attack, and I was there, I feel like it just really cemented that feeling of like this is helpful for me.
I'm sorry to hear what you went through with the relationship as well, Christina. You definitely didn't deserve that. Nobody deserves that. I'm sorry to hear that. Uh, a lesson, the first lesson for our viewers today was the fact that you took your mum to the hospital just on a whim and the heart attack was detected. Because if that was left undetected, it could have been very serious. So that's a first lesson for our viewers there today. I know I'm very guilty of it. Just ignore it until it goes away. No, we should definitely get medical stuff checked out. Our health is one of the most important things to us in the world. So it sounds like your gambling took years to sort of progress into a problem. You managed to keep it as entertainment for years until that jackpot, and then it started to spiral from there.
Yeah, for probably the first 2 or 3 years, it was very just what it was meant to be, entertainment. It was probably after that jackpot, I was, around 3, 4 years into my gambling, that kind of cemented my relationship with gambling. I started to go more frequently after work. I started to spend more. I started juggling bills. Anybody who struggled with gambling knows the MO. You start to being like, I can pay the water bill, and when I get paid next time, I'm just going to use this money. Maybe I'll win and just pay it then. You start to kind of have these little conversations with yourself. I would say I gambled for about 15 years, and for the first 7 of those years, you know, it was never so harmful that I didn't pay my bills or be able to take care of necessities. But what was happening was I was isolating myself from my friends. I was not saving really anything, spending anything I had extra. I was probably juggling bills, but I was still paying them. Um, and somewhere right around that 7 year mark, when my relationship started to really, really get the abusive really started to show up more frequently, um, I just felt really stuck. Like I don't know why I felt so powerless in that relationship that I couldn't get out of it, but I did. And for some reason, the gambling made me feel like I had some type of power. I can't explain it, but it just made me feel better. And so I really started to lean into the gambling about that 7 year mark to a more harmful extent, more destructive extent. I was spending like my paychecks gambling, and it wasn't like, I know sometimes there's a lot of stories where it's a wildfire. Within 3 months, they're financially devastating themselves. Mine was a really, really slow burn. Like it took 7 years to really start seeing the harm from my gambling. And then it took another 7 years of really harmful behavior. A lot happened in my life in that period of time. And, it took that 7 years before I finally was able to stop the behavior and seek help. But that last 7 years of my journey with gambling was really, really destructive. Lots of lies, lots of manipulation, lots of gaslighting, just the normal MO when it comes to hiding an addiction. Everybody saw me looking put together and normal, but on the inside, it was pure chaos. My financial life was not well. I wasn't paying bills. I was having to borrow money to pay bills. All my money I considered gambling money. I went from winning more often to losing all the time because it didn't matter. I was never going to leave the casino with money. Like, it was like, so I stopped winning less because every time I won, it would just go right back in. And so, it was just a vicious, vicious cycle. And it's so hard to tell 15 years of a story in an hour podcast, but it was just a lot of up and down, a lot of chaos, a lot of lies, a lot of just bad behavior on my part to stay within my means to gamble. Um, yeah, it was a rough 7 years.
I just want to take you back to the jackpot wait when your mum was in the hospital. I'm guessing you were feeling a bit of guilt and stuff as you're heading back to the hospital after you've done that. Did you feel like when you've presented that money to your mum, you've had that money there and you've been like, look what I've won? Do you feel that's going to sort of buy the forgiveness? Because I know I related to that straight away. That's the feelings that come up for me.
Absolutely. I'm like, I know you're mad at me, but here's the money. I'm going to pay your hospital deductible with this money. And it did. It did. It did work. at first, she was like, ah, that's great. Oh, how exciting. Because my mom liked to gamble a little too. So it was exciting to her. Um, and it did buy me forgiveness in that moment. And it probably started that behavior with them as well. Like, oh, if I just give them a little money, they'll be fine. Um, but then, as time went on and all the excuses and everything started to rack up, and, my mom started to feel the impacts of my gambling because I was borrowing so much from her to just cover my bills. It really started to take its toll on her. And to the point where she stopped gambling herself. She didn't really want to engage in it. And um, it just really started to impact all my relationships, you know, towards the end, really before the end, the last probably 4 or 5 years, it really started to impact, how they were with me. They started to be like, they had started having a conversation about having an intervention for me. And I didn't know about that until after I was in recovery, but probably about 6 months before I finally hit my rock bottom, they were planning on trying to figure out how to have a conversation with me. But they were so scared that if they brought it up to me that I would get so mad at them and I would never talk to them again. And I hate that I made them feel like that. But I don't think they were wrong. I think because I was so caught up in my gambling behaviors that if they had confronted me, I would have tried to lie my way out of it. I would have been upset. I probably wouldn't have talked to them because that's the state of mind I was in. But it scared them more to not have contact with me than to confront me. And, we've had a lot of conversations around that, whether that was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. I think to them, they just didn't want to not have a relationship with me. They didn't know how to at the same time.
As you're speaking of your story now, and we're looking back on it, I can see that you're aware that you sort of used your gambling as like a comfort blanket, as an escape from reality. Every time life got hard, going to gamble helped you forget about that, and made everything better for that small brief amount of time. Were you aware of that as it was happening? Did you know you were doing that as you were gambling, or have you only got that insight since coming into recovery and looking back?
Yeah, I think I didn't know that I was using it for coping. I didn't know. I just knew that I wanted to gamble. I didn't know that it was even an addiction. I didn't know that I was struggling. I didn't know anything about addiction really. I grew up really sheltered. I mean, I was raised by a single mom with my sisters, and we were just in a really sheltered environment. So I didn't grow up around addiction, aside from nicotine, and sugar, like just this kind of the normal things that are happening in your homes. So I never really saw anybody on drugs. The only thing I ever knew about addiction was when the DARE program came into our schools and talked about drugs and alcohol, but gambling was never mentioned as an issue. And the only thing I really knew about gambling was just from what I saw on the TV. Just some of the shows that would occasionally show gambling. I never even knew that gambling could be an addiction. I remember I would see the numbers on the doors, when you'd go into the casino, and they would have call the 1-800 number if you have a problem with gambling. But I think in hindsight, and who's ever listening to this is probably just going to be like, how dumb are you? But I always thought that kind of meant if you have a problem with the casino, not like if you have a problem gambling as an addiction, but just like if you have any issues with the casino, call this number. Like it was so small on the door going in that I don't know. I just never thought that was the number that you were supposed to call. I think this is really kind of the first time I've admitted that out loud. But because that's how much I didn't realize that gambling could be an issue. Like it's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be entertainment, and it's not supposed to cause harm. And the fact that it was causing me harm, I just didn't correlate.
Call 1-800 suggestion box by the sounds of it.
That's what I thought it was. Don't like the casino? Call us. Let us know what's wrong with it.
Give us your feedback.
Yeah.
We do share that other addiction as well, the sugar one that you mentioned. I stayed at a hotel 2 nights ago, and there was a chocolate fountain at the breakfast buffet. And yeah, I went slightly overboard there, so I'm glad I'm not the only one with that co-addiction, gambling and the sugar. Right, on your timeline there, you said you're about 6 months away from your rock bottom. Give us that 6 months. What's happened across the next 6 months leading up to that point?
Yeah, so the last part of my gambling that I talked about was just really destructive. I was still kind of in the thick of that relationship, but I was starting to kind of untangle myself from it. I was looking for a new job. I was doing things to kind of just get away from the situation. And I was eventually able to get out of that relationship. Um, but because I didn't really address like any of the issues, like this has been an avoidance for me for a long time. There's a lot of things I needed to address and talk about, a lot of harm, a lot of pain, a lot of stuff, even clear from my childhood. And because I didn't seek help, like therapy or anything like that, I ended up into another relationship that just wasn't healthy. It wasn't mean in the same way. He was a kind person, so that made it all right. But he struggled with addiction himself. And our addictions kind of enabled each other's addictions. And so it just wasn't, again, I mean, we're talking 3 relationships here back to back that just weren't healthy. And it was like, I kept always thinking that another relationship was going to help me. And in turn, I just needed to do the internal work and help myself, but I just wasn't there yet. So I met and married somebody, and I knew on my wedding day, like I shouldn't have gotten married. Like I'm just not well. I'm not mentally prepared to do all this, but I did. I just kept going into one decision after another. Um, and then, so I went to a therapist finally. I was like, I'm just not feeling like myself. And they recommended that I get on anxiety medicine, but I wasn't admitting to the gambling either. So they recommended that I get on an anxiety medicine, a depression medicine, which I did. And
Sorry,
they put me
Christina,
on this.
just let me stop you there 1 second. My 2 daughters have just walked into the room. I'm so sorry. Give me 1 sec. Girls, can we go upstairs to mummy, please? Daddy's just making a video. Okay, I'll be up shortly. Come on, your iPad's upstairs with mummy, so you can have a bit of iPad time if mummy's still sleeping. Okay, I'll be up very soon. Okay, am I okay to make this video? Yeah, we're going on an adventure later today. Maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes. If I was you, I'd make the most of iPad time because it's not often I let you have iPad time, is it? If I was you, I'd make the most of it. Go on, get inside where it's a bit warmer. I love you both. Up to the sky. I'm so sorry. Just to make me
No
look
worries.
even more unprofessional.
No, that's the thing. Like it's about being real. It's about being people. I was just making a series. You're gonna have fun editing this. I was just making a series of bad choices, and so my therapist recommended medication. Got on medication, and the medication that they put me on like numbed me even worse than the everything I'd already been experiencing. Like I didn't feel anything. So my gambling behaviors really got worse. Like spending all my house payment money, no big deal. Like it'll figure itself out, right? Not paying my car payment that my sister was a co-signer on. I didn't care. And which is just so far removed from the person I am. Like I'd always paid my bills. Like her and I had co-signed for each other several times over the years. Like we were both responsible. This addiction just took me so far removed from who I was, and this medication made it easier to do that. But I wasn't being honest with my doctor either. I was not telling her about the gambling behaviors. And then finally it was probably like 6, 8 months in. She was doing just a random, like, how's everything going? And I was like, you know what? Is it normal that I don't care about anything? And she's like, wait, what? And she just started asking me some questions, and like she gave me this scale thing, and everything was just zero. She was like, oh, we need to be off this medication now. We need to fix this. And I still at this time wasn't honest with her about the gambling, but I was being honest with her about my emotions and feelings and all of that. And so she pulled me off all the medication slowly, and I started to feel a little bit better. And right as I started to feel better, I was having some other issues. And this isn't always comfortable for me to say to a guy, but I was having some other issues and had to go to the doctor. After a lot of testing, it was determined that I had early stage cervical cancer. And so, I've got all this stuff going on. I think through all this, I dealt with infertility in my first marriage. And I think I still always had hopes that I would have a kid of my own, be able to be a natural mother, those kinds of things. I've always dreamed of that. And then that was just kind of a hard, nope, you've got to have surgery. There's no other way. There were other ways I could have done it, but it would have been really, really hard on me. And then I would always be kind of looking over my shoulder and having to do all these extra checks. And so I went to 3 different doctors, and all 3 of them recommended a full hysterectomy. And so, I was going through all of that, all the hormonal challenges that go around that. It really messes you up. It takes such a toll on your body. Fortunately, I was able to do the surgery. All my lymph nodes came back clear, which means I didn't have to have further treatment. And so it played into the emotional imbalance that I was already struggling with a gambling addiction. Then you throw hormones out of whack in that. And just like all the emotional tolls of just the abusive relationship and being in an unhappy relationship and the gambling addiction and cancer and not being able to be a mom. Like, I do this to let you know, like, my mental health was not good. It was at its worst, right? And I just kept leaning into the gambling. I didn't want to deal with it. I didn't want to think about it. So we all know that 2020 was the year the world shut down. And that was the first time that I'd had a break from my gambling in a really, really long time because the casinos shut down. So I couldn't go. So they were shut down for about 4 weeks. And I waited about 2 more weeks after they shut down to go again. But I remember in that 4 weeks that they were shut down, or that 6 weeks that I didn't go, I felt so much better. Like, I don't know, money was starting to come back. I was starting to kind of take care of things. I just remember feeling a sense of freedom that I hadn't felt in a really, really long time. And I was really hopeful that maybe I could just not gamble. But like I said, I lasted about 2 weeks back into it. And I continued to get worse and worse through the rest of 2020. And at the end of 2020, it was right around the holidays and like right before Christmas. And I had gambled my Christmas bonus, my paycheck, my husband's at the time paycheck, financially devastated myself. I had no Christmas gifts. And I was just at the lowest low. I was pulled off of, like my hormones were still kind of recovering. It was just a weird, weird time. And I was at my lowest. And I happened to be watching a show late at night after a gambling binge, like where I'd lost everything. I didn't know what I was going to do. And the show talked about food addiction. And it was called My 600-Pound Life, middle of the night kind of show. I was watching this lady talk about how she felt anticipation for the food. And I talked about how she felt. She talked about how she felt eating the food, the euphoria, like, oh, excitement, can't wait, like, this is amazing. And then she talked about how she felt after she ate the food. And it was all self-loathing, self-hate. Why am I doing this to myself? I keep doing this to myself. I'm going to kill myself doing this. And it wasn't like a regular meal, right? It was like 6 burgers, 6 fries. I can't even remember what the meal was, but it was 5 times what a normal person would eat. And I just remember connecting with every single emotion she talked about. And I just was like, I have a gambling addiction. That's what's happening to me. And so I kind of made a vow to myself then that I was just not going to gamble anymore. I didn't know about recovery at this point. I just learned about addiction, or gambling addiction. And I made it about 60 days. So made it through the rest of the year, made it through January. And it was at the end of February, the very, very tail end of February, that I got in a fight with my now ex. And I just went to the casino, and it triggered a week-long binge for me. And I won the most money I'd ever won gambling in that week. And I lost all of it and then some. And I was at my lowest of lows. I wanted to end my life. I had already been experiencing these emotions, these feelings of like, I don't want to be here anymore. But during that time it scared me the most because I really felt I could act on it. And so just to kind of fast forward here, I'll get to the last 2 days of my gambling. So I had went in, I'd won a huge jackpot. And when the cashier paid me out, he said, now you're going to go home with this. And it wasn't like life-changing money. It was like a nice used car kind of money. I could have gotten myself out of some really sticky situations I was in financially. I could have really helped myself with this money. And I remember telling the guy when he was paying me out, I was like, of course. Like, I was incredulous he was even asking me. I'm like, of course. Like, who do you think I am? You know, like, this was a lot of money. Like, and he just kind of was like, you know, he'd seen me around over the years. Like, he knew who I was. And 8 hours later, as he's leaving his shift, he just looks at me. I'm still at the same machine. And I had played almost all of it back. And he just shook his head. Like, oh God, you know? And that moment changed everything for me. Like, all the shame, all the chaos, like everything that I had been struggling with just came flooding out of me. And I just cashed out I think it was like a couple of grand, cashed that out and just ran to my car. And I remember just going home and just being so sick. I was struggling with a couple of different things. I was struggling with the shame, the guilt, like, I can't believe I did this. But then I was also struggling with the loss of all that money. That chasing energy was just so, like, I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I said, I'm going to go try and get it back and see if I can get some of it back. Even if I got part of it back, I would still feel better than I do right now. And I went, lost all that money, lost everything that was in my checking account. It was just after midnight, and I walked back to my car, and I was going to end it. I was like, I can't believe I've done this to myself. I can't believe I'm never going to be able to get out of this. And I picked up my phone because I knew I was going to have like a bunch of missed calls and shit like that. And so I was looking at my phone, and a picture that I have of my mom and my sisters from my sister's wedding was on my phone. And I was just like, I can't do this to them. Like, they love me so much. They just want me to get better. And I just made the decision right then. Like, I can't do this alone. I got to ask for help. I don't know what changed in me in that moment, but it was just a moment where I realized that I didn't want to end my life. I want to live my life. And I hadn't been living for a really long time. And I felt like I'd had all these chances and opportunities, and I just never let myself have any of them. I just sabotaged everything that could have been for me through my gambling and my behaviors. And I just didn't want to be that person anymore. I wanted to live a life that I didn't want to escape from, and I needed to figure out how. And so, yeah, that started my recovery journey. I feel like it took me a really long time to get here, but sharing my story, but here we are.
I thought you meant the actual addiction. You said your gambling lasted 15 years, and then you said you tried to stop 60 days before you finally did stop, just before that Christmas break. So roughly 14 years and a half, 14 and a half years. You didn't try to stop once across that 14 and a half years. You never sort of accepted, I've got a problem. I need to kick this.
Nope. I always thought I was just bad with money. Like, I never thought the gambling was the issue. I always just thought I've just never been good with money, and that was the problem.
Did your
I
family,
never
like you
looked at
said there,
it.
when you were looking at the picture of your mum and your sister, you said they just wanted me to get better. Did they could see it from the outside, but you couldn't see it from being inside the addiction type of thing? They'd known for years, had they, that it was a problem?
Oh yeah, I mean, they may not have known that the gambling was the biggest extent of it. They just knew I wasn't good. They knew that I wasn't happy. They knew that I was struggling, and they knew that I owed them a buttload of money. And I remember, like, my sister, you know, that she co-signed the car for me. And I just remember when it was getting repossessed, all the lies I kept telling her. Like, it just still blows my mind when I think about how I kept lying to her. Like, she's literally on the phone with the bank and they're telling her what's going on. And I'm still trying to convince her that it's fine. And I just remember my mom even saying, she came on the podcast for me, with me. And I just remember her saying, you should have won an Oscar for all the lies you told and how well you told it. And it just like those are, it's like she says it and but I'm like, I wouldn't want an Oscar for that. Like, I just still sometimes when I think, even 4.5 years into recovery now, I still sometimes a memory will pop up or like an old behavior or something will trigger me. And I'll just remember this stuff that I did to keep feeding the monster. And yeah, I still, every once in a while, like when I share a story like that, like me like literally trying to lie to my sister while she's on the phone with the bank. And finally she just put the phone down. She's like, just stop. Like, I'm going to let them take the car back. I'm not going to bail you out. And this is going to impact me and you're going to have to deal with that. And it was just kind of a really, really, but I still continued to gamble after that. Another 18, 19, 20, another 4 years. Like 2018 was the worst year. That was where I was diagnosed with cancer and all of that. And so it took me till 2021 just to stop gambling. But from 2018 to 2021, that was the most harmful extent of my gambling.
I was nodding along with all the lies. I'm sure a lot of the audience can relate as well. Guys, get in the comments below. Let me know the lie where you knew you took it too far, but the gambling addiction still made you tell that lie. Because I know I've got hundreds myself. Let me know below. Right, let's get into your recovery, Christina. Took in the first step that you took to get into your recovery.
So I went to my mom the very next morning and I just told her everything. And she said, well, I know somebody who's gone to GA. And let's call the GA hotline and figure out when the meetings are. I didn't even know anything about GA at this point. So I called the GA hotline and it was the worst. It wasn't the worst experience, but it wasn't the best experience. I got a bored kid who answered the phone and was just like, somebody will text you with meetings. I'm like, okay. And I felt like that was like the biggest step in my own start to recovery, was just calling somebody and admitting that I needed help. And to be received by that, like just very nonchalant, okay, we'll send you, somebody will text you with meetings. And that was it. And it's not like I expected them to roll out the red carpet and be like, oh yes, finally, we've got somebody here, acceptance, yay, what can I do? How can I support you? What kind of resources do you think would be helpful? No, it was just like, sure, somebody will send you a list. And it was several hours later. So it was like, I don't know how that experience could have been better or different. I mean, I do. They could have been kinder and more welcoming, but I got the list and the following Saturday I went to my first meeting. It was such an awkward thing because I pulled up and of course, as most of them are, they're in church basements.
Mm-hmm.
And I pulled up to the church and I was so nervous. I was shaking. I was so nervous. And I went to the door and it was locked. And I was like, oh man, I driven like 35 miles to get there. And it took me about 45 minutes and I couldn't even get in. And so I was like, I knew that if I went back into my car, I'd get in it and go home. So I was like, they have to be here somewhere. There has to be a door. And I was just kind of standing there and I saw somebody else pull in on the other side of the parking lot and go in a different set of doors. And I was like, okay, I'm going to follow that person and see if that gets me there. And it did. I followed him in, went to my first GA meeting, 3 older men and me. And yeah, it was my first GA meeting. I continued with that meeting for just over a year.
Your dedication there is amazing, because anyone who's not fully committed to wanting to get better, that locked door would have been enough for them to just go, oh, well, it's not meant to happen. Get back in my car and I'll
It
go back
almost
to the
was.
casino.
But I think I knew that if I turned around and got in my car, like it would just be, something had changed in me. And it was that moment that I realized that I didn't want to die, that I wanted to live. Like that moment changed it for me. And so I was willing to do whatever it took. And even though I kind of teetered there for a second, I just kept going. And that really is what recovery is. It's like, even if you have moments that you're like, oh, you can make that choice. You can go back the other way, or you can keep moving forward. And that for me was, I knew that if I even hesitated for a moment, I wasn't going to keep the momentum. And so I just kept problem solving, kept figuring it out.
What have been the biggest challenges that you faced in recovery, and how have you overcame them?
I think the biggest challenges for me early on were the finances, because I just really made a mess of things. My relationship was a big challenge. I remember it took me a couple of months, because I also started therapy at the same time. It took me a couple of months working with my therapist to come clean to my ex-husband, or my husband at the time. And I just remember he looked at me and he said, "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. People don't get addicted to gambling. You're just bad with money." And I just remember in that moment, I knew that I wasn't going to have his support. And, there was a lot of little sabotages early on in my recovery too. Like, I would try and be on a meeting and he would decide that was the moment he wanted to vacuum the whole house. Or when early days, I started recording the podcast, he would go and I would just ask him, like, "Can you give me an hour to do this podcast?" And he'd be like, "Sure." And then he would go into the kitchen and slam all the cabinets. And like, it was just, there was a lot of little determinants early on, but I just kept moving forward. Um, you know, Finding ways to work through the finances. I brought my sister in, who she oversaw my finances, because he didn't want to do it. He didn't want any part of it. So it's just like each thing I kept coming up to, I just kept problem solving, kept figuring it out. Self-excluded from all the casinos, kept going to my meetings, kept going to therapy, listen to podcasts. But some of the early challenges as well were just being in spaces with men. Like, not that there was anything, like, the three men in my GA were fantastic. They were wonderful. But I was coming to these meetings and my whole life was just chaos. And I was struggling and they didn't know what to do with me. They'd just be like, there, it's going to be okay. And I knew, like, I needed more support. I knew that I needed more than GA was offering. And so that's when I started kind of looking to social media to see if there were other women out there talking about this. Because I knew I was surrounded by women at the casino. I would see the same women. And if they were there as much as I was there, I knew that there had to be others that were struggling with this. But I wasn't finding them. And so I started just sharing my stories on social media, even in the podcast, very male dominated, and very few women were even guests on the podcast. And so then a fellow podcaster reached out to me, and she does a fantastic podcast called Beyond the 12 Steps. And she asked me to come on. Her story was gambling as well, with some other things, and she was long-term recovery. We hit it off. I loved the podcasting format, and I thought, I could do this. I'd like this better than social media. And yeah, that was kind of the start of the Bro Girl Society. But I would say just learning how to live without gambling was the biggest challenge.
Brilliant segue into the Broke Girl Society. Tell me and the viewers, for those who don't know about it, tell us how soon you started it into your recovery, and what you're doing there, what message you're trying to get across.
Yeah, so I started the Bro Girl Society 4 months into my recovery. So I entered recovery March 6th of 2021 and started the podcast. The first episode came out July 1st of 2021. So pretty early on. I at first didn't get a lot of stories, because I was still kind of building the support group. But I remember when I first released it, being excited that 20 people listened to it. And most of those were probably my mom or friends and family. And it was still, I was still excited because I'm doing something that felt good. I was talking about my story. And then it just slowly began to build. States were adding it to their resources. Clinicians were reaching out to me. I started doing kind of the conference circuit and like talking to people, and so they were starting to recommend it, and so it started to kind of get out there. I started getting requests to do interviews and things like that, so it started to slowly grow. The support group started to slowly grow with it, and now we've been doing it just over 4 years, and it's listened to in 70 countries. I have a queue usually of stories and women that want to share it, and we get thousands of listens now. And it has just been an amazing, amazing journey. And I've stayed pretty consistent with it for 4 years. I used to release an episode a week, and then that just got to be too much for me and my life balance. And so now I try and get a couple episodes a month out. But I haven't really taken long breaks. I might take, like, I took July off because it was just a, like, I took March and July off, I think, this year, just because my travel schedule has been so hectic. But it's definitely a passion project for me. Women, advocating for women in this space is a purpose and a passion. And yeah, so I don't see it stopping anytime soon. I hope to continue doing it. I hope the Broke Girl Society continues to grow. We have over 3,000 women in the Facebook support group now. And yeah.
Amazing, amazing. We'll have all the appropriate links in the description below to check that out and check out Christina's amazing work that she does. You spoke about the circuit, the conference circuit there. I've now got yourself on the channel. I've had Adam from the Modern Meeting on the channel. I've had Rob from One Day at a Time on the channel. And I love that you guys can all sort of meet up. There's like, I love that I can get you guys on an interview in this podcast format. I'd love to be able to sit down with you guys and do it face to face, but unfortunately, I'm from England. I live in Australia. You guys are all in America. I know you're not close, but you can meet up at these circuits, and I'm so jealous. I'm so jealous that you guys. I think you all met up in July, was it, in Columbus? I'm so jealous that you guys can all meet up face to face. How, since you've gone into recovery, Christina, how is your life improved, and what have you learned?
Yeah, life is great. Like when I said early on, it became about building. My early recovery was about building a life I didn't want to escape from. I had to learn new patterns. I had to unlearn old patterns, learn new patterns. I had to do a lot of work on myself, build self-awareness, make a lot of amends. But here now, over 4 years in recovery, I'm actually living a life I don't want to escape from. That really sums it up for me. I did a lot of work. I, ended that marriage and spent a lot of time on my own self, and just learning to manage life in healthier ways. And then I met my amazing partner now, and we travel, and I get to do, I work a job that I feel very passionate about within the gambling harm recovery space. I do the podcast and I travel a lot. I'm an international speaker now talking about women in gambling. I am on the International Problem Gambling and Gaming Certification Board. I was able to help bring a lived experience certification to the board so that people with lived experience can get trained in peer support and maybe do recovery and coaching, but it helps kind of bring an extra layer of training to the gambling aspect of recovery. So I'm really, really proud of that. Really proud of the friendships I've made. And, we call ourselves the Lived Experience Collective, and it's, like Adam and Rob and Brian Hatch, who does the All In Addicted podcast and who occasionally does the YouTube series with me, The Bet Free Life. We go through spurts with that. It just depends on how busy we both are. We keep talking about doing some more episodes, so we'll see. But yeah, and I'm working on a new podcast that is just a little side project. It's not going to take me away from the work that I do with the Broke Girl Society, but it's just another section. It's called the Broke Girl Society, the Healing Chapters, and it's just broader conversations with women who have had really hard things happen in their life and how they've rebuilt from that and they've found purpose and passion in it, similar to, my own story. So I'm staying busy. I am very, very dedicated to the space and just those conversations around women and support and gambling and all of that, because, it's not for me, and I can be very passionate about this, so cut me off, but a lot of people think that men and women gambled for the same reasons. And there is going to be some of that being true, right? Escapism or action, it doesn't matter. But I think that when it comes to recovery, men and women need a different recovery. It's okay to be in spaces where, there's men and women, but if women have experienced harm at the hands of a man, to say that the best thing for them is to recover in a room full of men, it's probably not going to be as helpful for women. And giving women spaces where they can talk about how, their hormones are impacting their recovery. It's not necessarily something that's really or ever talked about in a GA room, where somebody can say, I'm perimenopause and I don't feel like myself, and it's causing me to have anxiety, which is triggering me to want to gamble. And it's like, you have that conversation in a room full of men, they're going to be like, oh, don't talk about that. Like, we don't talk about hormones in this room. Or spaces where women can talk about mom guilt. Like, I can't believe I spent my kids' soccer shoe money. They need those shoes. And I'm just so sick of me doing this to my kids, Um, places where they can have those kind of conversations. Or maybe somebody is like, how do I date in recovery? How did I tell them I'm a person in recovery? I want to have spaces where we can talk about that kind of stuff and have a broader conversation, because recovery isn't just about recovering from the disorder, the disease, the addiction, however you identify. It really is about how do we navigate life in healthier ways.
I love that. One memory that popped back into my head was I remember my first ever Gamblers Anonymous meeting, and somebody who was sitting in there said I hadn't gambled for 6 years. He had 6 years of recovery behind him, and I remember thinking in that exact moment, I wish I had those 6 years. Now I've been in my own recovery since 2021. I realized those 6 years, his recovery wouldn't have worked for me. If I had got given those 6 years, it wouldn't have meant anything. I needed to go on my own recovery journey. Every one of us is individual. Every one of us has got our own story. Hence why we do these podcasts. Everyone's got their own story to tell, and everybody needs their own form of recovery. I just want to give you a massive thank you. It's been an honor and a privilege to have you on today. And thank you so much for giving me and the viewers your time.
Thank you for having me on. Hopefully you can make some sense out of this interview.
Guys, we spoke about Adam from the Modern Meeting a couple of times in this episode. I recently sat down with Adam and he shared his story. It's a real eye-opening one. It's the video on the screen right now. So click that video and I will see you over there.